Well, hello everyone. Thank you all for coming. I'd like to welcome you to Labour Home's event, our In Conversation with Andy Burnham and Steve Rotheram. I'm Marsha Thompson, part of the Labour Home editorial team, and this is the first event in London where they're going to talk about their book, but it's also our first Labour Home event. If you haven't heard of Labour Home yet, we are a new platform dedicated to covering the Labour Party and the wider Labour movement, from grassroots activisms to national policy and events like this, and we'll be doing a lot more, so do sign up to us and have a look at labourhome.co.uk, and of course if any of you want to pitch any articles, do that as well. I should also thank SME for Labour for supporting the event, and of course Ibrahim Dogas, who I'm sure we all know. It's great to have over 600 people signed up, and it really shows how eager we all are to have this discussion and hear from Andy and Steve. We will be filming tonight, just sort of the little bits of housekeeping. You can also take pictures, and please do tag us on their social media. Thanks to everyone who bought a ticket. We will be sorting out your signed book copies in the interval, and Andy and Steve will be around after the Q&A for a short period for any photos and additional signatures that would be needed. In terms of the Q&A, my number is on the door, so please do text in your questions and we will ask them in the Act 2. The discussion tonight will be hosted by the fabulous Wynne Jones, who I'm sure you all know from her Real Britain column in the Daily Mirror. So without further ado, please welcome to the stage Ros, Steve and Andy.
Amazing, thank you. Thank you very much for having us.
Any Spurs fans in? I thought you'd come up to give me grief.
So, Andy and Steve, welcome to the Big Smoke. Thanks for coming down here today to talk about Head North. And to everyone else, this is effectively the down south launch of Head North, which has had a few events up north so far.
Yeah, it's not the launch of the sequel, Head South. I need to say that.
That would be breaking news, wouldn't it? Journalists at the ready. It's been a real pleasure for me reading Head North, which you don't always say about all political books. I think would be fair to say. It's a really passionate, it's a really powerful and at times quite emotional book as it goes through the journey that both Steve and Andy have been on, both politically and personally. I think it should really be called Heart North. In many ways, it's a love letter to the communities that Steve and Andy come from and grew up in, and it's written with a lot of northern grit and northern heart. It's a story of friendship and solidarity, and it's got a fantastic gallery of photos, all worth actually getting the book for alone. The gallery of photos, which are begging for an ITV drama, Rotheram and Burnham, a gritty detective series, if you look in the middle. And there's a number of other alternative names that kind of occurred to me when I was reading the book. Two Paperboys Go South, Steve's Sixth Sense, because there's quite a lot of things where Steve has a kind of premonition about something political before it happens. We should have both been professional football players is a kind of a theme that goes on through the book quite a lot. And also, it was all Steve's idea, which seems fault. Yes, it was all Steve's fault. When you read the book, you will find that it's bookended really by two major events in these men's lives and in our national story, the Hillsborough tragedy and the Manchester Arena bombing. And everything else that happens in the book is kind of strung between these two events, appropriately because both expose the same rot, really, at the heart of our political system, and also the strength that comes from solidarity and community. So as you imagine, it's a book that's packed with some really moving moments. A lot of times I found myself incredibly moved when Steve read out the names of the 96, now the 97, lost at Hillsborough for the first time in Parliament, when Andy stands and faces the crowd's anger at Anfield and takes that on, and the moment that Manchester gathered itself after the arena attack in a mass showing of solidarity and defiance and hope. But there's lots of laughs as well, mainly at Andy's expense, I've noticed in the book. Let's imagine Andy during the 2015 Labour leadership election making a big rallying speech in a church underneath the religious slogan, JC is coming.
It's true. I wish I could say it wasn't.
It's a very good moment. And the moment Andy's wife, Mary France, appeared on Scylla's blind date with a future Tory advisor, that's another good moment. And also when, I think it was Andy's first speech to the House as a minister, is upstaged by a woman breastfeeding in the public gallery, which was Mary France again. And of course, so I suppose there's nothing funny about this current political moment. What's happened in Caerphilly last week is in some ways was a route for reform and a moment when Wales showed that it wanted to stand up against fascism, but it was also a disaster for Labour. And it's a warning, a very loud ringing alarm bell for what might happen next May. It's time for fresh ideas, time for radicalism, and there are plenty in this book. And of course, we know that if we fail to seize this moment, there's another kind of radicalism waiting in the wings, and that's the radicalism of Donald Trump and Nigel Farage. So I think we have to start in the book with Hillsborough. In many ways, Hillsborough is the foundational moment of this book. At a personal level, because obviously Steve was there himself as a young lad at a football game, and Andy is the only Evertonian in the village, was part of a community that was heavily affected by the events of that day. And also because Hillsborough wasn't a tragedy, it was a man-made disaster and a travesty of justice. And I think in the book, Steve describes it as the moment the establishment closed ranks on a city. And importantly, it was the moment that the corrupt state and a culture of cover-ups and a rigged system kind of revealed itself. And having revealed itself, you can then see that thread that goes through all these other moments from Grenfell, the post office scandal, the infected blood scandal, and all the people that these two have campaigned so impressively for over the last years. So I was going to ask this evening for Steve to start with a reading, the section about Hillsborough in the book. So we'll start with that.
Okay, just to probably,
And if you want to set that up,
to contextualise what this is. So, two football teams, the same two football teams, 1 year previously had played at the exact same stage, at the exact same location, in the same competition. No problems whatsoever, no problems. As you walk towards the ground at Sheffield, there were barriers and ticket checks, and everybody went through. We even had the same end of the ground, and a year later, as we were walking towards the ground, everything changed. The whole atmosphere as we were walking through, and people were, no ticket checks, and that created a sort of group that grew larger and larger and larger that couldn't get through the turnstiles. So in the book, I'm recollecting my experience of standing with thousands of others with no instruction, with very poor policing, with, it has to be said, a bit of chaos going on, because there were horses there, and what they were trying to do, I don't know, if you ever see the pictures, you'll see exactly what I'm describing. And so if I, from that moment, just read what I said. So this is because we were all so close together, I mean, very, very close together. And I struck a conversation with some lads who were standing near to me about the chaos. I asked them which part of the ground that they were in. They had 2 tickets for the Leppins Lane end and 1 for what was called the West Stand upper. My own ticket was for the Leppins Lane, and having experienced that place the year before, I wasn't thrilled about being there again. I asked the lads if they wanted to swap tickets so that they could all be together, and they agreed. I took the 1 ticket for the stand. At least I'll have a seat, I thought. the intense claustrophobia we were feeling then suddenly lifted. The concertina gate at the side of the stadium had been opened and people started to flock through it. It was such a relief as I felt fresh air and space. I walked in and within a few minutes to go until the kickoff, saw the tunnel that took people down to pens 3 and 4. I found my way upstairs to my seat in the West Stand Upper, where I was about 16 rows back from the front. Everything appeared to be back to normal. Fans were finding the seats to get the best possible views as the noise levels, pre-match atmosphere and the anticipation grew. There was a wall in the front of the upper tier and I instantly started to notice a few people being pulled up from the terraces below. I thought nothing of it. This used to happen on occasions at matches as people climbed up to be with their mates. But then I noticed more and more people being helped. Something this time was different. What was happening, I didn't see it at first, was that people had seen that a crash barrier had collapsed and they were trying to help their fellow fans. And the thing was, the police were pushing people back in, even though they could obviously see something of a significant magnitude was happening in front of their eyes. And then you'll see the game got stopped and then Liverpool fans were taking hoardings down so they could get people across the pitch. But, you know, you have to think about why did people who were trained in first aid simply watch as bystanders as the fans themselves tried to save the fellow fans' lives. And that, for me, is one of the stark contrasts that we've tried to grapple with. And as you know, we battled for 36 years to change that. And earlier last month, the Labour Party announced that they would introduce a Hillsborough law. And I think in a large part, that's down to the fans, the supporters, the campaigners, and a little tiny bit of it is because myself and Andy had a part to play in it.
You've always struggled, though, haven't you, with the survivor's guilt of that, swapping your ticket outside and always wondering what would have happened if they hadn't walked up to you, and wondering what happened to the people who did take your ticket.
More about what happened to those 3 lads, because that was right on kick-off, because that's when we were getting in, and I disappeared upstairs. They actually walked down that main tunnel. And of course, you always think, yeah, as a human being, what happens to those 3 individuals. But I think the thing that kept everybody going was the injustice of, as you said, you know, the whole city cried injustice and nobody listened. I mean, you've said that on many occasions. And I always have this thing in mind that if it was another city, another set of fans, somewhere else, would the establishment have reacted the way it did against Liverpool fans? I don't know the answer to that.
It's interesting because later on you write in the book about when you met Boris Johnson and you refused to shake Boris Johnson's hand, and it's that same theme, isn't it? Like, do you want to tell us about that moment, like what he wrote and how that fed into that narrative?
He did a piece in The Spectator, and in The Spectator there was a guy called Ken Bigley, if you remember, and he was beheaded, and the video of that horrific murder was posted on social media, and Liverpool decided that because it was so horrific, they would have 1 minute or 2 minute silence to recognise this horror. And Johnson slaughtered Liverpool and said it was wallowing in self-pity. It was a self-pity city, really uber critical of everything. I mean, this is the same guy, by the way, that when something tragic happened in London was all over it and front and centre having a minute's silence, but that's a different matter. because he then was sent to Liverpool by Michael Howard, if you remember, who was the leader of the Tories at the time, and then tried to bluff his way out of it, as he always does. So given that all those years later, I'd been sent to meet Boris Johnson, by the way, and he was getting out of a car, and I obviously, in my inimitable way, I explained the folly of what he'd done and what he'd said to him. So all them years later, I'm now the Metro Mayor, and he's the Prime Minister, and he comes bounding in, and he shakes Andy by the hand, shakes Ben Houchin by the hand. I think Dan Jarvis was there, and he comes over to me. Now, genuinely, I've always been brought up to respect the office. So I said, in all conscience, Prime Minister, I respect your office, but I can't possibly respect you because of what you did and the Spectator article. And he just stood back and he went,
He's not used to it.
no.
Andy, you've written in the book as well about your experiences on that day in being from a place where lots of people had gone to the game, and you were at the other semi-final that day as someone as fanatical about football as Steve.
Yeah, that's right, Ros. Thanks for coming, everybody, by the way, and thanks for listening to what we've got to say in the book. It is true. We were born 3 miles apart, even though I'm the Metro Mayor of Greater Manchester. It is true that I was born in Aintree. I like to say that I was born closer to Liverpool city centre than the Metro Mayor of the Liverpool city region. If I want to wind him up, he's what we call a woolly back, for those who know the terminology.
What you have to understand is that Andy is half Scouse, half Mancunian. So half of them want to get pissed, but the other half won't pay. That's
It's free tonight, by the way. So I kind of, the truth is I did grow up my first year as an Evertonian, born in Aintree, Old Roan to be precise. But then my dad got a job in Manchester, so I grew up in between, and I loved both cities, always have done. But as an Evertonian, so that was my mum and dad all the way back. That was my upbringing, nothing but Everton and home and away. And so I was at the other semi-final on that day. And we'd been in the pub the night before, because that's where I start my account in the book. All of us saying, I can't believe the FA have given you the away end, the Leppings Lane again at Hillsborough. And I'd been in there as an Everton supporter the year before, and it was the worst afternoon I'd ever had at a football match. And I think we just have to remember what it was like in those days, as Steve said. So, yeah, I was at Villa Park watching Everton beat Norwich, and I just remember the scoreboard, the old scoreboard at Villa Park, 6 dead at Hillsborough. And the thing is, Ros, for us, he's like my older brother, by the way. He's 10, how many years older? It's about 10 years, aren't you? A bit more than that. So we've been growing up in the 1980s in the Northwest, and my first political memory is watching Boys from the Black Stuff with my mum and dad. And it's kind of hard to write about, but I remember the last programme of Boys from the Black Stuff. It was called George's Last Ride. And this old docker was being pushed around in his wheelchair around the sort of complete dereliction of the Liverpool docks. And I remember I was only about 10 at the time. I remember looking at my mum with tears streaming down her face, because her dad worked on those docks, and it was like, you were conscious, weren't you, growing up, that something wasn't right and that things didn't feel as they should. Then Toxteth happened, Moss Side happened, and both of those things felt close to home, but you didn't know anybody involved, only 10 at the time. Then the miners' strike, because I by then was growing up in the Lee area, and that kind of felt close. The 1980s were getting closer. But then when Hillsborough happened, it came right to our door. This wasn't just, sort of people who we kind of knew. These were our friends. In my case, my closest school friend was there, and I talk about coming straight home from Villa Park, ringing his mum, and this voice at the end of the phone just saying, Stephen, is that you? I mean, that's my memory. It's my abiding memory of that day. And then being in the same pub where I was with him the night before, and people just drifting back from Hillsborough, all the Liverpool fans just coming through the door, and just traumatised, sort of dead behind the eyes. And it's kind of, a world now that it's hard to imagine how this country was then at that time in the 1980s. It was a very, very broken and divided place. Maybe there's echoes of it now, but that basically was how it was. And then, of course, I was then later in life in a government that didn't do anything. And so when this gentleman here says to me a few months before the 20th anniversary, you're going to get an invite to Anfield to address the 20th anniversary as Culture Secretary, and you're going, I'm not taking no for an answer. That was in the end, the turning point. But I knew the government I was in was wrong and that the Liverpool fans were right because of everything I'd been through. And it was kind of a bit of a turning point in my life.
That's when you started to talk to me, though, because at first you completely blanked me, didn't you?
I did. I thought he was a Lib Dem, because the Lib Dems were in control of Liverpool at the time, and I was culture secretary going to all these events, Liverpool capital of culture, and this fella with a big nose kept coming to try and talk to me with a chain on. I'm like, oh. I was a bit more tribal in those days, but eventually he said, I'm Labour, don't you? And I was like, are you? But we kind of fate threw us together in some way, didn't it?
Absolutely, yeah.
So to take you back a little bit, Steve, what was it like growing up in the Rotheram household? And I want to touch on this a bit because I think not enough of our parliament is made up of people who have normal backgrounds, and it's really, it's great, it's a good story.
I'm not sure there's anything
normal
that's called, I don't believe in normality. We're all different degrees of that, aren't we? So I'm one of 8 kids. My dad was a forklift truck driver, and my mum was a stay-at-home mum, as they often were in them days. But she did have 8 kids to look after. We lived in a 3-bedroom masonette first, and then a 4-bedroom house with an inside toilet. And we lived in a little fishing village called Kirby, which I know nobody out there will understand that, but we used to think Kirby. It was what was called a new town, if you remember, in the 60s, late 50s and the 60s, where there was an overspill, and they called it a new town. And he built these huge swathes of council estates. And then he thought, what else did he need? So they gave us a pub and a chippy. And that was it. And then he wondered why, decades later, there was lots of problems, social problems that were created. It was just like, and it was in the middle of nowhere, and we had to get a bus, an occasional bus at the time, into town. So for me, it was just dead normal, because everybody else lived in the same place, and nobody had money particularly. So we just got on with it. We played footy for 8 hours a day in the street. Now that's antisocial behaviour. But that's what we did, and we expended all of our energy. There was no time to do anything else because you just played sport or got bits of wood and knocked the ball in sort of tennis fashion. But I loved it. I mean, the one thing that we did have more than anybody that I know was unconditional love. My mum devoted her life to her 8 kids, and no one could say anything about her 8 kids. She'd do that for them. So she'd make certain that we were called in check, so you couldn't get away with anything with my mum.
And the thing is, the security of a council house was massive, wasn't it? As it was for kind of millions of people in this country. In that, life was tough, but that was a complete foundation. 100%. And it's a sad thing, isn't it, that in this day and age, that kind of bedrock is not there for so many people. But it made all the, you didn't have that worry, did you?
No, and there's some of us who are trying to bring them back, Andy, aren't they?
We might get onto that later on. But with your background, though, when you came, Parliament was a culture shock, it's fair to say.
God.
Tell everyone what David Cameron said to you, 1PMQs, when you asked him, in your broad, I think you exaggerate, you went with your broadest scouts, didn't you, for a certain PMQ?
I genuinely was trying, that was my watered down, distilled, I've lost my accent now, as you can tell, so that was being in Parliament, so I was trying to enunciate, I was trying to project, and I asked him a question, and he said about the accent, I suggest that the honourable gentleman goes and practices some poetry. That was his snooty response, and didn't answer the question at all.
The best one was he would. You and Jacob Rees-Mogg used to kind of sit. He was at that far end, like reclining, wasn't he, on the bench, and you were right opposite him, near Dennis Skinner's old seat, weren't you?
Yeah.
And you kind of went for each other all the time, didn't you? Yeah. And there was one afternoon when he was up and down, and he was having a go at him and intervening, and Rees-Mogg was trying to sort of dismiss him, and then I think you got up again and said, he goes, you know, the honourable gentleman must find it so galling after all of that money his parents have spent on his education that he's ended up sharing a workplace with a brickie from Kirby.
That's brilliant.
It was a priceless moment, I think it's fair to say.
It was, yeah, very absolutely priceless moment. So when, so you became a bricklayer.
Yep.
And that was...
I was good at it, by the way.
You were good, yeah.
Anyone wants any foreigners, see us later, right? Because never know how long this job's going to last.
And there's a bit in the book where you go off to the Falkland Islands.
Yeah.
To go and earn a few quid.
Yeah.
Rebuilding the Falkland Islands. Miserable, quite miserable.
Miserable existence, yeah.
Existence.
Yeah. 4 seasons in one day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've come back from there. Then you put yourself through university.
Yep.
And postgraduate masters, wasn't it? And then you come to London. And how did you feel the first day that you came into Westminster?
Oh, well, I'd never been into the chamber. So the first time I'd walked into the chamber was when I had been elected as an MP. And so I found that whole experience, I mean, eye-opening, because I actually say, don't I, in the book, that I don't think it's a fit and proper place to run a country from. You hear some of the things that are going on, that's literally only scratching the surface of what happens on a daily basis in there. I would have thought the House authorities are constantly having to deal with things that don't make it into the public. But I used to watch fellows who are about my age now, 60 years of age, walking around with what I used to call the beautiful young things. And he was surrounded by these people. I just thought, how unhealthy is that? Because that's only the power that's attracted people into that. I just found that rather unpalatable. But I just need to tell you, just so that you'll know, because I did start in construction. Mr. Burnham went to Cambridge.
Have I ever mentioned that?
He never mentioned it. You never ever. It's like Keir Starmer's dad was a toolmaker. It's like I've never heard it before. Yeah. And Andy went to Cambridge. That's a university, Cambridge University. And so Andy...
You went to Cambridge away and
I went to Oxford.
Oxford away.
Liverpool drew 1-1. So you have this unbelievable privilege of going somewhere like that, you know, a dreamy place like that.
Do you think, when I read the book, one of the things that I take from it is that your imposter syndrome, which you write about many times in the book, which Steve doesn't seem to have this, yours might be more hidden, Steve, but Steve doesn't seem to have the same level, and I wonder to what extent Cambridge, while being obviously an incredible opportunity, was also actually quite difficult, whether it sort of injured something in being there.
I can't be the only one in here tonight that's kind of had that experience of
I'm probably another
to
one.
a university like that and finding it really quite hard to even begin to think you can be there without a tap on the shoulder and someone trying to throw you out, because it was like that for the first year. And everything I was talking about before with Hillsborough, that happened in my first year at Cambridge. So I kind of, I felt going home for the holidays was like a just release from it a bit. I just felt under pressure all of the time to sort of, live up to something. I'd be in these kind of seminars with people who would just, I would be like nervous about saying them, and they would stand up and just like hold forth and just, throw all these opinions out. And it was about the middle of my second year that I realised they were talking complete rubbish, but it just sounded so good and it looked so confident. So it was only then that I started thinking, well, maybe I can stay here. But I think it maybe brought the imposter syndrome out, to be honest, being there and kind of living in that environment. But what the big thing it told me is this country is two countries. They are basically almost like parallel worlds, aren't they? Where the two just do not meet, actually. I would go there for the term and come back, and I couldn't relate one to the other. I'd been back for the Easter holidays, and as you heard before, been at Villa Park. I go back to Cambridge. I left a traumatised Northwest to go back for the summer term, and nobody was talking about it. Or if they did talk about it, they were just kind of picking up the narrative that it was the Liverpool fans to blame. And it was just a sort of complete kind of sense in me that the country was basically, two different places. And I still think that's true, to be honest. I think it is still like that, Britain. It's so unequal. And people live such different lives. You can see it in the university route or the technical, it's still like that, isn't it? You can see it in the referendum in 2016. I remember my brother saying to me, Remain's going to win, isn't it, Andy? I've not met anyone at work who isn't going to vote Remain. And I said, no, I don't think so. Not from what I'm picking up in Lee. It's not. But it was kind of really telling that was how it was. I remember Chris Smith, people might remember, former MP, amazing, wonderful person, said to me, he was master of a Cambridge college at the time of the referendum. He said every single fellow of the college voted Remain, and every single bedder, as they call them in Cambridge, voted Leave. And it just was, you know what I mean? That upstairs, downstairs thing is still there, isn't it? All over the country. And in some ways, this is what the book is trying to, we were trying to make Westminster kind of face up to that world that as Steve said, that city that had cried injustice for 20 years. That became our mission in life and in everything. It was everything to us, wasn't it? Making that world face up to what Liverpool was saying. And the process of going through that has been kind of our defining theme, hasn't it, really? But it kind of says something that the country had to be forced, if you like, made to listen to them. I at the kind of day after the second inquest, when finally the verdict of unlawful killing had come through, I spoke at the dispatch box, and I did say, how could an entire English city have cried injustice for 20 years and no one in this place was listening? How does that happen? And I don't think we've ever had a proper answer to that question, have we?
No, not at all. And just to go back, because you might have missed it, but Andy went to Cambridge, and I didn't. So, but actually, if you have a look at our life journeys, one of us graduated from Harvard 18 months ago. I just thought I'd throw that in. You can have a guess who it is. It wasn't the one who went to Cambridge.
I suppose what you're describing there about, going home to Liverpool, feeling the disconnect between those two worlds is then when you get to Anfield at Steve's invitation, is that same thing again, isn't it? The government are saying one thing, London's saying one thing, the establishment are saying one thing, and in your heart that's not right, and suddenly you're confronted with an entire Anfield that knows it and you know it. And I think that's why it's I think for a lot of people watching that moment, it's still a very, very powerful moment on television where people watch it and just think it was like a moment of reckoning, but it fell on your shoulders.
Well, it did to a degree. I mean, Steve had asked me to go to the 20th anniversary, and I was the culture secretary. But the moment he whispered that into my ear when we were at a delayed funeral, weren't we, of all things, in Liverpool Cathedral, Anglican Cathedral, my blood ran cold, because straight away I felt the guilt of having been a government minister for all those years and not done anything, knowing in my heart that he was right, the rest of the Liverpool supporters were right, and the government I was in was wrong. So it kind of confronted me immediately with the ultimate dilemma. And what then happened was weeks of agonising about it, speaking to my family and going over it and over it. Should I go? Should I not go? What do I do? And my younger brother John just said to me one time, he just said, "And go if you're going to do something for them." By that he meant the families. He said, "But if you're not, just stay away. Don't go." And so it was the kind of that in the end that kind of made me kind of decide I was going, but I didn't tell the government. I didn't tell the the machine, if you like, I was going to go and do it. I was basically freelancing at that point. The only thing I did do was I rang Maria Eagle, and I said, would you, Maria, make a joint call with me for full disclosure of the Hillsborough papers?
As a fellow Liverpool
Yeah, and
MP.
Maria had done some really good campaigning over her time in Parliament before we got going. And so she said she did. So we made a joint call, but we were kind of breaking as ministers with the kind of, the process, if you like, and just did it slightly freelancing. So, I did, and I went, and you've described it, Ros, but to that moment, when I took my steps out to speak to the COP that day, I feel now like I was taking my first steps out of Westminster. I felt I couldn't kind of reconcile what, I had to break out of the straitjacket to do something. And it was interesting today, a member of the House of Lords was just reminding me today that I told him that I had, I needed his, it was either when I got back, it was either I resign. If you don't open it up, I will resign. And I was in that position. Although I will forever remember to my dying day sort of coming off the COP that afternoon, a little bruised to say the least. And I could feel my phone going in my suit pocket, endlessly. I reached in, let's say this is like GB calling. Yeah, all right, and I was like, oh my goodness.
He was then the Prime Minister.
Yes, and bear in mind, Gordon was just like beset by all kinds of crises at the time, and there was just problems wherever he looked, and I just thought I was going to get the Alex Ferguson hairdryer treatment when I knew I'd have to, answer. And I was like steeling myself, and I just thought, you give me another problem. Gordon, yeah, Andy, I would do this. Andy, you've done a brilliant thing today. I just wanted to thank you. And I was like, really, Gordon? Are you sure? Really? Yeah, that's quite.
It's such a lovely moment in the book. I found that such a lovely moment.
I never ever will ever forget it. And he said, I won't carry on with the Scottish in terms of, for the Scots in the audience. You've done the right thing, and if there's anything I can do to help. I said, well, do you mean that? I said, could I raise it at the cabinet tomorrow? And straight off the bat, he said, I'll bring you in at the end. And we were at that time of the Labour government when we were having cabinet around the country. When governments get so unpopular, they're in this desperate move that they try and maybe they'll love us if we go to Glasgow. I don't think it quite worked out like that, but we went to Glasgow and we had a
we'll look out for that.
Cabinet meeting in the SECC up there. And I remember, as long as I live, the end, I was just like a coiled spring, waiting for this end of the agenda. And it was very rare for anything ever to be added to a cabinet agenda. Normally it's got to be properly on the agenda and everyone is given advance notice. And Gordon just says, well, everyone saw what happened at Anfield SA and I'm going to ask Andy to say something. And I did. And then this, conversation breaks out on the call for disclosure of papers that I made with Maria. And, it's hard to say, but the colleagues were arguing against it. And I was like, oh my goodness. I just like, what am I, if this doesn't go the right way, what am I going to do? And then he says, well, we've heard everybody and some good points have been made, but we're going to back Andy on this. And I will never, ever forget Gordon saying those words as long as I live.
Just to fill the blank in, that was between going to Glasgow and then walking off the pitch. As you say, battered and bruised a little, and you wanted to go home. And I said, well, we've got another thing to do, which was in Liverpool Town Hall. And it was, all the families were going to be there and we were going to give them the freedom of the city and blah, blah. And so I wouldn't let you go. On a couple of occasions you said, no, I think it's best if I go. Anyway, you were persuaded not to go and we walked into Liverpool Town Hall, which is a beautifully ornate Victorian earlier building, and central staircase and it bends around. And
I had to weight the world on my shoulders.
Oh, you were feeling.
I felt so sorry for myself.
Yeah,
oh,
quite down. And as we walked in and walked up the staircase, Andy being an Evertonian, who was there to greet you?
Kenny Dalglish, Alan Hansen, Stephen Gerrard and Jamie Carragher. And Dalglish says at the absolute top of his voice, in earshot of everyone, including all the Hillsborough families, "Oh no, you've not come here to upset them all over again, have you?" And I was like, oh, literally, like, the man who ruined my childhood is now like having a go at me in the middle. I was like, wish the ground would open up, but anyway, it changed again then, didn't it? Because we committed, both of us, didn't we, that night, to sort of throw everything at it. Yeah. And then, things began to change.
It was Dalglish's sledgehammer wit, wasn't it? I mean, we needed something to break the ice, sort of thing.
We did, and he definitely did that, yeah.
He definitely did that. So getting, in that context, getting the second inquiry, where were you both where were you on that day, Steve, when you heard?
No, we were there.
You were there?
We were there every step of the way. We were there. I was there when the original verdicts were quashed, and we were there when the second inquest determined that 97 people were unlawfully killed, and that was a moment that you'll never forget. Not for us, because we actually saw the families and what it meant to them. Some of the families had never picked up the death certificate of their loved one because they didn't accept that it was accidental death, which was the original verdict, and he said they're not having it. And it's all of that it's them individual stories, it's those emotional ties, it's the visceral nature of some of the pushback against what we were trying to achieve, and the smearing that made it so important that we got to where we got to. And the former chairman of Everton Football Club said that the establishment picked on the wrong mums, and they did. They picked on the wrong mums, because it was mainly it was the women who drove all of this.
The thing that I remember very much, though, was as we got more and more into the fight, and we were coming to the point when the first report, the Hillsborough Independent Panel, was going to be published, we had a thought that we had to kind of learn from who'd been through it before. Do you remember?
Oh, yeah.
And there was an SDLP MP called Mark Durkin, who used to talk to us a lot. And I had a chat with him once. I said, "Do you think we could bring the Hillsborough families over to see the Bloody Sunday families and just..." And I went over with Margaret Aspinall and Jenny Hicks, and it was one of the most humbling things I've ever seen to hear and they gave all of their kind of knowledge and experience. And that kind of started to create something important, which is a theme we might pick up, where this pattern of injustice has been repeating in this country every decade. If you go right back, you go right back to the 50s, and the nuclear test veterans, and that's an ongoing injustice. The 60s, thalidomide, people would think about the 70s, Bloody Sunday, the 80s, Hillsborough. And it was only when the Bloody Sundays families really opened up, where we kind of begin to sort of see the parallels. So when we were then elected as Metro Mayors, Grenfell happened within a month or two. We arranged, didn't we, for the Hillsborough families to come down here. And we sat in West London with the Grenfell families, and we got them hopefully a bit more on the front foot. But despite that, here we are now, 8, 9 years on from Grenfell, and still the pattern has not been broken. Not one person has been held properly accountable for what happened at Grenfell Tower in June 2017. And doesn't that tell you something still that is fundamentally wrong with this country and why we need a Hillsborough law? We did so much, didn't we, to sort of, give them all of our knowledge. And it's a great thing that we've seen, isn't it, building this solidarity between all of these ordinary people thrown into these situations. But, this Hillsborough law really needs to, break the stranglehold that the state holds on power. And it really needs to sort of shift that balance of power and tip those scales of justice in favour of ordinary families, because it is still happening to this day, and we won't stop, will we? Until we've got justice for Grenfell, accountability for those who left those people in those unsafe flats on that night.
Yeah, absolutely right.
I think I'm being told. I think that's coming up to an hour already.
Dear me.
And I want to make sure that we get to Manchester and just before we sort of finish the first half. So at this point, you both decide. Can you both tell us about your decision to leave Parliament? How did you make that decision? Like, head north, when did you decide? So one of the things that I find quite fascinating is, given that where both of you have come from, to become MPs is so important. It's not like somebody who just thought, oh yeah, I'll just be an MP for like 5 minutes and then I'll go to the city, or which some MPs are like. It's not a particularly big deal in their lives or their families' lives that they're an MP. In your lives, it was as much as your parents could ever have probably dreamt of, and beyond. So to give that up, why did you decide to give that up?
I got frustrated at the machinery, so I tried to... you can spend your time down there genuinely trying to do good things, and lots of brilliant MPs spend an inordinate amount of time trying to get things through the parliamentary processes. And there was a programme that was the BBC, I think, commissioned it, and it was called Inside the Commons. And that showed you the frustrations. I was trying to get a bill which was to limit the age of tyres on coaches, buses and HGVs, because a constituent had lost their son when a tyre blew out on a coach, and he was 19 and the tyre was 20 years old. And there was no legislation in the country to stop this. So we tried to put this together, and you know what a campaign of mums like, very tenacious. We got the bill ready and all that, and basically the Tories just said, no, we're not doing it. And there was no real reason to do it. Actually, if you think about it, getting rid of the old tyres was, if you like, if you talk about it just fiscally, it was meaning that you buy new tyres. So if it was just because of that, but it wasn't. It was because some of the retread tyre people lobbied against it so that they could retread. We had the bill. We had they put a green ribbon on it when it's ready, and they put the green ribbon on it, and she'd been down there, and it just failed. So I literally had enough. I thought, this not a waste of time, because there's some brilliant stuff that happened, and there's some brilliant stuff that happens all the time, but the whole system where we'd read documents that were genuinely this thick, 1.5 inches, 2 inches thick, and you'd read through it all and you'd try to make sense, a lot of it in legalese, and you'd get through it, and then you'd see the debate because it's on the telly in your office, and you'd see, oh, right, okay, and then you'd get to the voting lobbies, because the bell used to go and you get 7 minutes to get there, and the bell used to go, and you'd find out that the party had decided which way you were voting. Oh, what's the point in reading 4 hours reading a document that thick for? I just found that pretty pointless. And we actually talk about some of this, about the whip system and the parliamentary processes, but it was a bit disheartening. So a bill goes through Parliament, which was the Devolution Communities Act, so this bill's going through, and I was there when it was being read, second reading, and I thought, this looks good, because they were giving some power away from Westminster to other areas, and we were one of those that was putting ourselves forward. Greater Manchester, who have always been sort of forward-thinking and progressive, but Liverpool City region, we'd fought each other, whilst they had a sort of a group called the Association of Greater Manchester Authorities. We didn't. We just used to fight each other, and they, like Labour authorities. So I thought that looks really good. Anyway, that was the start of a conversation I had with Mr. Burnham, and look where it led.
I mean, on the tyre thing, I mean, it just shows you, doesn't it? This kind of deregulation impulse is just, we'll come back to this in the second half. The power is with the unelected state in this country. There's a kind of presumption of deregulation in so many Whitehall departments. And then, Steve campaigns all the way against 20-year-old tyres, but then the system just goes with that. And we've challenged that, haven't we, in our roles. The thing that I go back to the 2015 Labour leadership election, which people may remember, and
Did you stand?
you may not have noticed, because I'm not sure I made much impact. And it was the vote on the welfare reform bill that really kind of made, I'd been through the whole thing with Hillsborough, and I'd fell out of love with the place by then, and I was really kind of like unhappy, but I was still trying to play the Westminster game of doing things. And I moved Labour to a position of opposition on that bill, which was called the Reasoned Amendment. But Jeremy went through and voted for the full opposition, and you couldn't explain it on social media, it was just, the nuance was lost. But when I reflected on that afterwards, in the kind of year or two afterwards, what I kind of came to the conclusion of is this: Westminster makes a fraud out of, I think, good people, because it makes you say things that you don't fully believe. The script you've got to take into a TV studio, or it makes you vote in ways that you're kind of, you're not 100% committed to. And there's a reason why Westminster does not connect. The people inside are often unhappy with the way it is, so they're not going to then connect, are they, with the voting public? And I'd kind of, been very much a Westminster person, but the experience of Hillsborough had taken me away from it. Then that 2015 leadership election just left me thinking, well, I'm lost with, I kind of get the sense that people don't know who I am and what I'm about anymore. And you kept working on me, didn't you, saying, we'll leave together, we'll sort of launch this devolution thing together, and if we do it together, we may succeed. And I kind of and ahed, didn't I? And eventually, I came back to you having said no, didn't I? That I said, no, I'm ready to go. And I think it's the best thing that we ever did, to be honest, because it is opening up, I think, a bit of change now in terms of politics, and beginning to ask some really important questions. The thing I remember, just lastly on this, I stood under first past the post in 2015. I remember really not enjoying that general election. It was really quite a difficult atmosphere on the doorstep. UKIP were doing well, and just difficult. It was like the early stages of the referendum was coming. And then we left, and I stood under proportional representation for the first time at the mayoral election in 2017. And honestly, it was like a revelation to me, because all of a sudden, we weren't doing what Labour normally does and walks past like 5 houses and then knocks on the door where there was a Labour promise from sort of 4 years ago. You had a reason to stop at every door, because even if it was a Lib Dem, a Green, or even a Tory, you had a chance for second preference. And actually, the conversation was then about finding a point of agreement with that person. And I kind of had a sense of, hang on a minute, the conversation now is aligning with where the public are, because they want points of agreement between parties and a solutions-based approach, or what Steve and I call a place-first rather than a party-first approach to running things. And to me, that whole experience has really kind of brought me to the point, as we argue in the book, this political culture, this system that we have in this country, needs wholesale root and branch change. You need to sweep it out, and you need to usher in something very different. Westminster business as usual is, I think, a big part of our problem. Why it doesn't feel like we can fix things. Things are too piecemeal and superficial. And I feel, maybe we'll get on to the second half, this country needs substantial political and electoral reform to then support long-term economic reform, which is more collaborative and a different way of thinking about it than we've done before. But I kind of, really kind of have come through that whole journey of being in Westminster, 10 years almost as mayor now. And I think we need to sort of embrace a very different way of running this country.
Well, thank you to everyone for being here in the first half. We're having a little break. I think the bar's open, so come back. Come back for the second half, where we'll talk about becoming mayors, what it was like becoming mayors.
I hope before that, you're not letting him get away with that short vignette of leadership. He failed twice, not once. So we need to explain that.
There's always time for another. Yeah. So.
Thank you. And it is actually true. I did speak on the altar of a church in Sheffield, didn't I? And
you did.
I'd really given, I was in the dying days of the campaign struggling against Jeremy. And someone, when the Q&A started, someone in the back said, Andy, you gave a really great speech there. And I was loving every word of it. But do you realise you spoke for 20 minutes under a sign saying, "Repent, JC is coming"? And I honestly, I had to go, oh my God, do you remember that? It was
Writings on the wall,
divine
yeah.
intervention.
Pardon?
Divine intervention.
It was divine intervention, and it was meant to be. The big man was on Jeremy's side.
All right, fantastic. So, yeah, see you in a bit,
Can I have a
everyone.
drink?
Thank you.
Okay.